Surely you've all heard about Chat GPT. It's all over the news with warnings that it's coming to take your job from you and with warnings that content creators and writers are absolutely screwed. Chat GPT is totally going to replace you in every way. Well, I'm not so sure about that. Even when earlier this month it came out that CNET has been using AI to generate their stories since late last year, they actually got in trouble for that. And ever since academia started freaking out because ChatGPT was scoring higher than some humans on an MBA exam, people have been really focused on what the future is going to entail, especially for people like writers and content creators. So in this episode of the How to Be an Author podcast, we're going to be talking about what AI such as ChatGPT really means for your writing. Are you at risk of being completely replaced? Are writers going to disappear? I'm going to front load the response to that to make you feel better. I say not so much. I say, let's see what AI such as ChatGPT really does. And let's see also how it can supplement your writing, help your writing platform, and do all kinds of other things for you as a writer. Things that are positive, things that you don't need to be freaking out about so much. I think that's really, really important. So welcome to the How to Be an Author podcast, and let's get going talking about ChatGPT. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karenna Akavane, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. Hello, thank you so much for joining me on the How to Be an Author podcast. I'm writing coach Karenna Akavane. It is my job to help writers like you go from aspiring or frustrated to successful and happy. And I do that with a holistic approach that doesn't just talk about writing skills, though we do talk about those, but I also like to talk about things like mindset and marketing and productivity, all of those other things that actually make a huge difference in your writing success. So one of the things lots of my writers have been asking me about is ChatGPT. And believe it or not, I've been using ChatGPT for some time now. No, not to write my books and not to, completely write my scripts for my podcasts because I've noticed some limitations, but I do use it for certain things. So later on, I'm going to be talking about that with you. But first, let's kind of rewind and go back to the basics because sometimes we hear about things and we don't quite know what it means, and then we're afraid to ask once things have gone on for a while. So let's do this no nonsense, no embarrassing answer to the question of what is ChatGPT. ChatGPT is kind of this language processing tool. It's driven by AI technology, and it's something that enables us to kind of have these human-like conversations with a chat bot. So this thing can basically answer questions and it can assist you in tasks such as composing emails, writing code, or crafting essays. Now, ChatGPT, the one I'm talking about, the specific one, is open to the public free of charge. That's because ChatGPT is currently in a phase that is focused on research and feedback collection. So it's basically learning from its interactions with us. And there's also a paid subscription version. And these paid versions are actually probably exponentially more powerful and faster and more advanced. But, as for the question of is ChatGPT or are other AIs sentient? Do they, actually think like a human being? I would say not so much, even though there have been rumors, right? There have been rumors that this is a thing. And I would think that not yet, at least hopefully not for a long time. But of course, this exponential learning is something that we're definitely going to have to be looking at because ChatGPT is kind of scary good, as Elon Musk said. He's warned that we're not far from dangerously strong AI, and that's definitely a fear. The chief of OpenAI, which is the producer of Chat GPT, Sam Altman, said on Twitter that Chat GPT got more than 1 million users in the first 5 days after it launched. That makes Chat GPT the fastest growing app of all time, far beyond things like Facebook and TikTok. Right? The analysis says that ChatGPT probably had 100 million active users in January, only 2 months after its launch. For comparison, it took 9 months for my favorite platform of TikTok to reach 100 million. So keep that in mind, right? Now, for those of you who haven't yet played with ChatGPT, I really recommend going and just playing with it, because that way you're going to see the possibilities and the limits. So you can easily access ChatGPT by visiting chat.openai.com, and you can create an OpenAI account for free. And once you sign in, you can start chatting away with ChatGPT. So what you do usually is that you can ask a question. And right now you can ask as many questions as you'd like, which is nice. You can also look up kind of step-by-step instructions, but really I've felt that the trial and error approach is kind of the best one. Just keep asking different types of questions, and you can see how you can tailor your questions to get the kind of feedback or kind of response that you're really looking for. What's interesting is that one of my friends, actually someone who works in PR, she said that she realized how unclear her communication was when she started asking ChatGPT some questions and not getting the responses she was looking for. She realized she wasn't asking the question in the right way. So she credits OpenAI and ChatGPT with basically making her clarify her way of communicating in writing. I thought that was pretty interesting. Google is freaking out right now that this type of technology could really disrupt its search business, and that is a point. And as for whether this is going to destroy all jobs, I think there will be some jobs that kind of phase out, but other jobs that are going to be coming on that are completely different, right? So this is just something that you have to keep watching. OpenAI and ChatGPT are very much a work in progress. So that's really interesting. So ChatGPT also scored a passing grade on a medical licensing exam in the US, a Wharton Business School MBA exam, and 4 major law school exams from big universities, right? Wow, so exciting. But, you know, there's a nuance. There's some limitations or challenges that people have when they're working with ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is basically this neural net. It's been trained to predict things, right? And sometimes it makes up facts, which is a little bit dangerous. So when people are using this to write essays, they can find that there are some really incorrect facts that seem to pop up with that, and that's really important. But also, everyone has different ways of communicating, and ChatGPT still has a little bit of flatness to it. So when you're asking it to write a poem or a story or an essay, it doesn't really have that human nuance, right? Because this is the thing about writing. When you're writing, it's the nuance, it's the mistakes, it's the humanness, it's the imperfection that actually really makes people react and, feel like they're in it. So that's a really interesting thing that you need to be thinking about, right? So for example, in terms of doing free-flowing conversation, Google's project, which is called Lambda, actually works better. ChatGPT has been designed to operate a little bit more like Siri or Alexa, types of digital assistants. So kind of interesting. And it was trained on a bunch of digital text that's culled from the internet. But there are limits to the type of information that it was trained from, right? So people have been testing the system and they look at the responses and they're like, okay, are they convincing? Are they useful? Are they truthful? And then there's a technique called reinforcement learning, which uses these ratings to hone the system. Okay, so let's talk about some of the most popular uses for ChatGPT currently. What are people really using this for? They're using it to write and debug code. This is pretty useful, could also be pretty dangerous, but hey, you can use it to create short summaries and long form essays. But this takes a really advanced, system of asking questions and stitching things together. ChatGPT can apparently solve complicated math problems, but I can't do that, so I wouldn't know. It can write and compose music. It can generate keywords and website text. And this is what I'll be talking about a little bit more in just a second, because this is really useful to you as a writer. It can craft headlines and ad copy. This too is interesting, the headline crafting ability. The keywords are so important. It can create custom resumes and cover letters, and it can write original poetry and jokes. Now, I used it to write poetry as a joke to send to my family. And honestly, I really do feel like the poetry that I wrote myself was better. ChatGPT was a little bit flat. But anyway, okay, so how can you effectively leverage ChatGPT as a writer? First, let's talk about how we can use it in our marketing as writers, because so many of us really, really hate to market. And I think that it's important for us to realize that ChatGPT can help us. It can make marketing a little bit less unsavory as a writer. So you can use it as a tool. So use it as a resource to streamline your brand building efforts, to reinvigorate your marketing strategies, and to kind of come up with new content. So that's kind of interesting. You can basically ask ChatGPT, you can be like, hey, can you provide me with 10 headlines that I could craft about my book to promote my book? Or what are 10 things that I could do to promote a book about blah, right? You can ask that. Now, some of the responses are not going to work so well, but some of them will. So that's kind of interesting. In a future podcast, I'm actually talking about marketing. And for my Writing Coach on Demand people who get the extra, bonus materials after the podcast comes out and after you all get your basic email that you get each week if you're on my mailing list, which I highly recommend, right? Go to creativeandwritingcoach.com and just click on join us or, join one of my lists and you'll be getting all of that good stuff. But if you're in Writing Coach on Demand, where you get to sign up for office hours each week and get bonus materials, you'll be getting a list of 50 things that you can do for book promotion. And I actually crafted that list with ChatGPT, which I think is really, really fun. But again, it works with things that are kind of more short and sweet, things that are numbered, things that are listed. It's not really great at this lyrical text, right? So then if you're writing an essay or you're running out of ideas for your blog or you're looking at, writing on a complicated topic, sometimes when I do this podcast, I actually use ChatGPT as some kind of a, an idea or structuring tool, something that's more of a launching pad. So it's not going to elaborate on things, but it's going to give me some kind of an outline and have things structured in a way that I don't go off on too many tangents. And I think that that's pretty useful for me, and it can be really useful for you. But again, you're not going to want to count on ChatGPT to craft your whole entire text, because that ends up with something that's really flat and that's maybe too keyword heavy, and something that might actually be reused by a bunch more people, or they have something similar because they were using ChatGPT too. And honestly, if you're asking the same question 10 times, the responses are going to be remarkably similar. Not identical, but remarkably similar. So I think that this is one of the big limitations. If you're writing content for your blog on your website, you don't want it to be listed as something that's too similar to everything else that's out there. So really think about that. Now, the keyword research is super interesting, and marketing specialists are still using this platform to compile lists of keywords and phrases for SEO strategies. So I find this interesting, but yet again, this is not perfect, right? It gives you ideas, but sometimes your ideal reader is going to react to different keywords that ChatGPT can't even begin to figure out. And that's the thing. Again, it's the nuance. We have this kind of instinct when it comes to who our ideal audience is that ChatGPT can't possibly figure out. But I have felt that when I do try to use ChatGPT to craft certain keyword phrases for my podcast, for example, or certain tags, I have gotten more downloads. So that could be an interesting thing, right? Those keywords are key. So let's talk about how we can have ChatGPT do some of our writing for us But again, I'm not talking about writing in your book. I'm talking about writing in a blog or in your marketing materials. You really need to give it a good prompt, right? So when you're asking ChatGPT to write copy, it's good at proofreading and it can write creative responses if you prompt it right, right? You can say, write a poem in iambic pentameter about my kid drinking the last, drops of milk from the fridge, and it'll do something like that. Now, is this something that you would be able to market as a beautiful poem? Absolutely not. But this is something that you can passively, aggressively give to your kids so that they don't do that again, right? But some things that I'll use as a prompt, for example, and that you can do as well, is you can say, hey, write a quick introduction paragraph for an interview that I gave an author who's talking about procrastination, for example, right? Or you can say, hey, give me some ideas for my lead magnet. What kind of copy could I have on the button for the lead magnet for downloading extra scenes in my book, right? Or you can say, write directions on, following a writing prompt, for example. So all of those things can be things that can really work for your website or for your blog, right? And often I'll look at ChatGPT also as a source of, questions that I might want to answer on the podcast or in my emails or on my blog, right? So I'll ask ChatGPT, what are some of the most common things people want to know about writing a book, right? And do I think that those answers are, that nuanced? Not necessarily, but I can tweak my question as well. And sometimes it'll come up with something that I hadn't thought of that I can definitely use, again, as a jumping off point. Now let's talk about the more creative stuff that ChatGPT can do. If you're a writer, you can actually have it create a wireframe for, your website as a writer, which could be kind of interesting. You could have it design a social media strategy. As a writer for your book, you can have it do a content calendar for, different things that you want to do. It can design icons for things, and it can do all kinds of things. Like, really, the sky's the limit. But what it's going to be is that you need to have the right prompts and the right context. So again, the more specific, the better. Now, personalizing is another really cool thing that you can do for ChatGPT. Now, this is where we start to talk about your ideal audience, right? So personalizing lets you customize your content to your ideal audience, right? So let's pretend that you had a quiz on your site. Is basically a lead magnet. And so you've asked people what kind of writer they are, and you have 3 responses. One is the OCD writer who wants everything perfect. The other one is the brand new writer who really doesn't know what they're doing. And the third one is the writer who's writing for themselves and who wants to have fun with it, right? So then you're going to say, design me an email series to nurture a relationship with a writer who is afraid that they don't know what they're doing, for example, right? Or you can personalize it to, I don't know, age groups, or people who live in a certain area, or people who are a certain astrological sign. Think about that, right? So, rewrite this quiz response for people who are introverts, or write button copy for a button designed for people to join my mailing list, even though they're super undecided, right? So think about that. Or also you could do things like, hey, write alt text for my image for someone who's sight impaired but wants to know about writing. These things are really, really great. You can also have ChatGPT basically act as your ideal reader, right? Act as a character, right? So you can say something like, how would a romance reader react to a book that has, a enemies to lover storyline, right? Or act like the ideal reader, act like someone who is a 45-year-old housewife in Omaha reading my book. How is she going to feel if I approach her with an email? What should I write to her? Things like that, kind of interesting. And you can also kind of make ChatGPT motivate you. You could say something like, I don't feel like writing today. Please act like the writing coach and help me to finally get writing again. But I have to tell you, as a writing coach, having a real person there and getting on a Zoom call with me is probably going to be more motivational than knowing that you've asked intelligent AI to motivate you. but that's just me, right? So that's kind of interesting. You can also have ChatGPT summarize a text. So this is kind of interesting because let's say that you have a long synopsis and you just can't seem to get that synopsis boiled down to what's essential. You can say, summarize this synopsis into a shorter summary, 3 sentences long, and you paste it in. That'd be amazing, right? Or you could say, list the main takeaways from this article about writing, and you paste it there. So you're saving a lot of time with the summarizing thing, which is kind of interesting. But also remember that ChatGPT is using any of the data that you give it, right? So if you're sharing data that's sensitive that you don't want there, well, just be a little bit careful with that. You can also use ChatGPT to check for potential biases or blind spots in your writing or in your thinking. Let's say that you are writing a blog post for new writers and you are trying to advise them of something, but you haven't really thought that maybe, for example, people who are neurodivergent are going to feel that this doesn't really help them. It doesn't work for them. So you can say, what are some common blind spots or biases for talking to writers? What am I overlooking, or what are some ethical issues that might arise from writing about this thing? Or, what are some of the cultural biases that I might be adopting with this? You can start to ask that of ChatGPT as well. But what does ChatGPT really mean for content creators or for writers who are trying to churn out social media content to build their author platform? I think that it's not going to replace that work, but I do think that the automation of content creation is going to mean that you're going to have less time spent brainstorming or taking notes, and you can spend more time on actual, producing these pieces of content, on curating them, on editing them, and on making them higher quality, which is really kind of cool. So that's really interesting. And then you can kind of think about, if everyone's using AI, what if you don't use it? Will you stand out more? And how can you stand out? So that's very interesting as well, right? You can ask AI some questions such as, what kind of TikTok video should I be creating as a writing influencer or as a book talker or as a writer talker? These things are super, super interesting to ask, right? Or what are some of the trends in writer talk on TikTok that I could be tapping into? Here is one thing that I do worry about with all this ChatGPT thing, and I kind of hinted at it earlier on, and this was, if everyone's using it to create all of this content, does that mean that there's going to be even harder time getting audiences' attention and standing out from the crowd? I think that that is a possibility, that we're going to have a proliferation of material, much of it very, very similar. And I think that it's going to be harder to kind of make a splash when there's that much out there. So that's something that we definitely do need to think about. But, that's something that I think is coming. But right now, just make sure that you don't completely use ChatGPT as a crutch and that instead you use it as a jumping off point. That is so, so crucial. Now, as to how to use ChatGPT to break out of a writing rut, for example, I think that this can be so interesting, right? So you could ask ChatGPT, please write a description of a character who is strong but has a few key weaknesses, somebody who was abused when they grow up and they live in this place and they do this as a job. What are some of the main weaknesses and strengths that this character can have, for example? Or you can say, write a love scene between two characters, one of whom is very inexperienced and the other one is experienced. I don't know. I've not tried this on ChatGPT. I don't know if it has limits as to how spicy it'll make things. I do know it has limits, like it won't write things that are potentially destructive or dangerous, things like that. So it's learning about that. But I do think there's so many ways that you can use ChatGPT. You can say, hey, how do I fill in Save the Cat beat sheet for a story where my main character is searching for this and comes from that, right? There's so many ways that you can experiment. And of course, there are things that you can take and that you can leave. But I think that, the possibilities of how to use ChatGPT to kind of get you out of a writing rut or out of writer's block, they are almost endless. let me know. Send me an email on creativeandwritingcoach.com telling me if you've used Chat GPT and how you've used it. I'm really fascinated to know. And also, if you are ready to really explore all the ways to use these different technologies, but also to stand out from the crowd, I definitely have courses for that. My course From Idea to Published in 6 months is a way that I think is going to help you to be exponentially faster and more efficient and productive and better when you're writing your book. It's almost like using Chat GPT, except it's all you, baby. So think about looking at that course. Imagine, where will you be 6 months from now? Will you still be talking about finishing your book, or will you have your published book in your hand? It's all up to you. Go to my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com, and you can also look at online courses for writers.com. You're going to find all the information about From Idea to Published in 6 months right there. Highly recommend. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about the possibilities of OpenAI and other types of AI, specifically Chat GPT. I hope this cleared up what it does and doesn't do, and I hope it made you feel better about the fact that it is not taking your writing job from you and that you can use it to make your writing all the better. I'm looking forward to being with you next time on the How to Be an Author podcast. If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.